If external fire is about giving abundantly in order to access the abundance you need, relational fire is about nurturing intentionally in order to access the nurturance you need. In both, you get what you give. So as you can see, we're following the same trajectory from spiritual to external to relational and onward. First, you defined your core values and deepest beliefs. Then you determined how you wanted to express those values within the community. And now, you're going to figure out how to express those values in your closer relationships. As we discussed in the last chapter and videos, the FIRE system works like this. 1. Focus on your big picture purposes. 2. Express that purpose outwardly in terms of how you care for others. 3. Express that purpose inwardly in terms of how you care for yourself. We're right in the middle of our journey. We're discovering what it means for that big picture perspective of focus on values and purposes to sprinkle throughout all facets of your life. So, what does it mean for your relationships to support your core values by allowing you to thrive? What does it mean for you to be the person you want and need to be within your relationships? What does it mean to nurture your relationships intentionally so that you can draw the nurturance that you need from them? Here's some food for thought. In 1986, the psychologists John Gottman and Robert Levinson set up the Love Lab to study the interactions of newlyweds. They would hook couples up to electrodes that measured their heart rates, blood flow, and sweat production, and ask them questions about their relationship. Then, 6 years later, they followed up with these same couples to find out whether they were still together. Gottman and Levinson discovered that the couples who were the most physiologically active during their interviews, the ones who sweated more with faster heart rates, tended to be the ones with the unhappily ever after stories. These couples, whom the psychologists dubbed disasters, either divorced or were unhappy in their marriages. On the other hand, the couples who maintained calmer physiological states during their Love Lab interviews stayed happily together. These couples were able to talk about the intimate details of their relationship, including conflicts that they were facing, without breaking a sweat, literally. Gottman and Levinson nicknamed these couples the Masters. But what story were those electrodes telling about the couples in the Love Lab? What do pulse rates or a few droplets of sweat have to do with relational success? Gottman ultimately determined that the physiological data, signs of stress or calm, simply reflected the emotional culture that each of these couples created. The more trusting and intimate the relationship, the more relaxed the couple was in their interactions. But the more strained and distrustful their relational culture, the more stressed they were as they discussed the ins and outs of their lives with the researchers. In further studies, Gottman continued to examine how masters created their trusting cultures and how disasters created their stressful conditions. He discovered that people in successful relationships tended to cultivate a few simple habits that had profound impacts. Chief among these was a tendency to respond to their spouse's bids for connection with interest, respect, and support. So for example, if a woman told a story about her day, her husband would listen and ask questions that signaled he was paying attention. Couples who responded positively to one another's bids for connection, 87% of the time remained happily together 6 years after the study. On the other hand, couples who divorced in that same period of time tended to respond to their spouse's bids with disinterest, disrespect, or a lack of support, 66% of the time. Kindness, it would seem, is the key. The relationship psychologist Tai Tashiro echoes Gottman's findings in his book, The Science of Happily Ever After. There, he discusses the high correlation between enduringly satisfying relationships and the character trait of agreeableness, a capacity for warmth and cooperation, sympathy and tactfulness. Moreover, the significance of kindness extends into all of our successful relationships. Tashiro describes kindness in our friendships as providing praise after successes and moral support after failures, and generously giving with no immediate expectation of payback. When we look at the science of good relationships, it seems so simple, doesn't it? It appears all the lessons our mothers taught us about playing nice were really more astute than we give them credit for. But what about those relationships in which, despite your best efforts to be kind, agreeable, supportive, and calmly available, there are still many undesirable elements swirling around? What about those relationships that make our pulses race and cause us to sweat, no matter how kind we are? What if, like my friend Amy, you find yourself in a relationship at work or home that stresses you to the point where you can't express your core values or be the person you want to be? I'd say in these situations, kindness is still key. But the kindness in these circumstances looks a little different. Think tough love. Think boundaries. As Tashiro puts it, all people have some traits that are less desirable, and those traits can drive us crazy. When those traits go unmitigated and manifest themselves as chronic meanness, cruelty, or a general lack of concern, then people are right to point out these concerning characteristics and to ask for some mindful changes on the part of that guilty party. Sometimes the best contribution you can make to a relationship is a courageous setting of boundaries. So, within relationships, a boundary is, first, a guideline or rule that you create or adopt to show people how they should behave towards you if they want you to feel safe or respected. 2, a sense of how you will respond to people or what consequences will result if they ignore those rules or guidelines. For example, my friend Amy now has a clear boundary regarding lies. The people in her life know, most of them without needing to be told, that she values honesty and transparency. That's their guideline for behaving in a way that will make her feel safe and respected. And Amy knows that if someone in her life consistently ignores that guideline or boundary, she will actively respond rather than suffer in silence. She will simply exit the relationship. That's the consequence for repeatedly lying to Amy. Boundaries don't exist, as Amy's former boss probably thought, to keep people separate or to limit intimacy or even sacrificial kindness between them, but rather they allow people to remain close. That's because boundaries support trust. Because Amy knows she has the strength to leave someone who violates her boundaries, she's confident that she can create healthy relationships rather than settle for less. She's free to approach her current relationships with a willingness to trust. She trusts in herself as well as in the people she is building relationships with. Now, sometimes kindness via boundaries, or tough love if you will, can truly bring out the best in us. Enforcing a boundary doesn't always take the extreme form of leaving a relationship behind. In fact, it usually doesn't. Often, when people exhort us or actively require us to do better by them, it can change us for the better. The psychologist Henry Cloud explained this in his book Boundaries: When to Say Yes, How to Say No to Take Control of Your Life. He says, "We change our behavior when the pain of staying the same becomes greater than the pain of changing." Consequences give us the pain that motivates us to change. The image of a relational fire burning in a fireplace to provide warmth, security, and joy to a home becomes more apt the more deeply we investigate successful relationships. Think about that. The fire needs intentional fuel. Sticks of firewood that we cut and set aside specifically for this purpose. Think of this fuel as the kindness Gottman, Tashiro, and many others have described. These sticks of firewood are acts of calm attentiveness, support, and respect. We can feed this fuel to our fire with our every interaction with family, friends, and fellows. The fire also needs specific boundaries. It burns in a fireplace rather than rages throughout the whole home. These boundaries are the set guidelines that we need to be treated, and what consequences will result if these guidelines are ignored. Without them, a fire meant to warm our home becomes a disaster, a force that consumes everything precious to us, including our sense of self. When you light and tend your relational fire by creating and implementing your relationship development strategy, I want you to consider these two aspects of a home fire. Upon first glance, they might seem contradictory, but continuous kindness and continuous boundaries are actual natural counterparts. This kind of nurturance that you need in your life will have both aspects. In your best relationships, you'll receive the care and attention you need, but also the clarion call to be your best self. When you make your best contribution to your relationships, it will include facets of both gentle and tough love. Just remember, the relational fire burns in a clearly demarcated fireplace and exudes the warmth of the kindness it feeds on. Build this kind of fire, and you'll always have the nurturance you need.